Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. Today we're back here at the Iron Tower, which has been doing rather well, and I really want to finish this build today along with a couple of other things around here. I don't get to do much building in this series because typically I'm trying to do tutorials, and there are very few tutorials I can actually do for builds where I'm improvising some stuff, but I thought it might be worth taking you guys through some of the thought processes that go into me building stuff in an improvised sort of way. How I pick materials, how I decide where things are going to be built and what style they're going to be built in, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be more of a build-focused episode. But I've been thinking a little bit about this structure and the considerations that we had to put into building it. If you happen to miss yesterday's episode, I've been building this tower around here, but we had to make sure that it was a decent radius away from these villagers so that they wouldn't end up spawning iron golems on blocks of the structure itself. They're still meant to only be spawning iron golems in here. And there's one other structure that we have to apply the same kind of consideration to, but for a very different reason. And that is this, the concrete maker that we made in a previous episode. And the reason I've been putting off decorating this is because it has a bit more of an explosive component to it. It drops TNT from the dispenser up there every so often while I'm using the machine, and building around anything that has TNT as part of it is always a bit of a challenge because you end up with your with your TNT end up blowing up part of the walls of your structure if you build too close. And there are some weird considerations to take into account with TNT. For a start, the fact that when you prime TNT, it moves a couple of pixels in a random direction, so it's not always going to be predictable where it explodes and the radius of things it blows up. And so when you're building a wall, you actually have to build it out a little bit wider to account for the variation in distance that the explosion radius can take place in. So it makes building around this stuff a little bit difficult, and that's really why I haven't got around to building a thing around the outside of this. This, I figured, was probably going to be sort of a combination of a watermill, because I want to have a watermill at the back here, despite the fact this is a lake and not a river. Just suspend your disbelief for that. I feel like a watermill build would be really, really nice here. Also, I kind of want to turn the rest of this into an alchemist's guild, and that might be a little bit strange for the concrete maker because it's not like a potion brewer or anything like that, and that's typically what you think of when you think of alchemists in Minecraft settings at least, but I like the idea of them turning concrete powder into concrete. People have noted that concrete isn't really like an outlandish thing because the Romans had invented concrete, apparently. This is some history that I honestly should read up more about because I never really knew that. But I think it's kind of fun that the alchemists could be working with the concrete and kind of manufacturing it in secret almost. Not to mention the fact that I have read a lot of the Discworld books in my time, and the Alchemists Guild in the Discworld books is a place where there are always explosions coming from it because they're just mixing chemicals they shouldn't be mixing. And so I like the idea of this being an Alchemists Guild that's constantly got some kind of distant explosion noise happening from it while the concrete maker is running, of course, which is very much a player based thing, but I think it'd be kind of fun to decorate this whole thing with a kind of eccentric build. Not that Founders Forge isn't already quite eccentric. We've got a tavern over there with a fox's head on it for a start, so we can make this a little bit cartoonish. One other thing I did want to do, by the way, and that's something that I can swoop down here and get some more slabs for, is resolve the problem with iron golems being able to spawn on trapdoors, because if it does happen, in the instance that it does happen, there is a pretty easy solution, and one that should not really impact the efficiency of the farm at all, and it will kind of rely on me actually landing on the beds. There we go. What we can do is we can place another slab over the top here, basically adjacent to the slab that's keeping the villagers in check. And what that should do, hopefully, is provide an unspawnable space for golems, because that's a half block there. It's the bottom half of the block. And also, it kind of restricts the space above this trapdoor in which golems can spawn. I'm not 100% certain that this is going to resolve the problem, because I've noticed in some other people's videos they've demonstrated that golems can spawn if there is an air block directly above the solid surface, but then a transparent block or a non-full block above that. I believe Nembon demonstrated in his video that you could have a grass path block above a block where a golem could spawn, and it might still spawn in this area. So I don't know if this is actually going to affect anything at all, but some people in the comments mentioned it, so I figured it might be worth a try. If nothing else, it's not going to impact the efficiency of the farm, and we'll be able to keep an eye on the situation while I'm working on the rest of this structure. So this is something I intend to get finished today, if at all possible. Although, I'm probably going to do a fair amount of this off camera. The reason being, it's enormously hot in the UK right now. It's actually kind of uncomfortable to record stuff with my big headphones on in the studio. And I can clue you into some of the processes that I think through while I'm working on a build like this, but for the most part, I think I'm probably going to be a lot more comfortable if I don't have to wear my headphones while I do it. What I'm also going to do is spend some time doing what I've been saying I was going to do for the last couple of episodes and take down the old iron farm and the demonstration of the iron farm mechanics in 1.14.3, which are no longer really necessary. They're both kind of taking up space that I could use for other things, and I would love to get all of this glass back for the Nether Hub project, for example. So now that we've taken the lava out of that one as well, I think it's only fair that we take some of this stuff down. And so while I figure I'm probably not going to do all of this with my headphones on, we might as well do it in the form of a time-lapse. Hi folks, and welcome to a commentated time-lapse for this video, and a lot of the progress you're going to be seeing in this video is going to be in the form of narrated time-lapses, simply because, yeah, there was a lot of a lot of warm weather to contend with today, and it just wasn't very pleasant to record commentated style, so I'm recording all of this in the evening after I've done all of the work in today's episode. I didn't quite get as much done as I wanted to either. I wanted to start on the Alchemist Guild build today, but instead I just ended up taking down the old iron farm and the old demonstration of the iron farm mechanics, and then working a little bit more on the iron tower. So that's what you're going to see in today's episode, with some soothing music in the background, because I feel like after a long day of work, it's kind of nice to relax. So, as you can see, I've let the villagers out of the old iron farm. There are only 3 of them left in there, and eventually they all end up just kind of taking a dip and unfortunately falling down the kind of drop chute there, which doesn't have lava at the bottom of it anymore, but I don't think they survived the full damage after all, which is a bit of a shame, but there you go. I was just taking this thing down layer by layer so you could see the destruction of the iron farm as opposed to the construction of the iron farm, but kind of in reverse. And I think it looks kind of pretty taking down stuff like this in a sort of spiral pattern, just so you can see everything slowly decomposing, I guess. People often ask me why I don't use a beacon for doing this, and the simple answer for that is typically that the time it saves me is relatively slim. Like, it would still take me a while to go and get the beacon and set it up and everything, and by that time I could already have done a bunch of work. Not to mention the fact that beacons, even with haste 2 and efficiency 5, don't let you insta-mine every single type of material. I could have taken care of the stone brick that way, but all of the wood and the glass I would still have had to have taken down manually at roughly the same speed. It would have made things like a fraction of a second faster, but really not all that much faster in the grand scheme of things. And next up I moved on to taking down our first demonstration of the villager scare mechanics producing iron golems, and I feel bad that I wasn't really as clear in that video as I could have been that this was meant to be an early prototype of the farm intended mainly for demonstration purposes. I think a lot of people kind of took this as a permanent farm design, so I'm sorry about that, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this look at a more permanent farm design in the last couple of episodes. I really rely on folks from the technical community to lead the charge on that kind of stuff, because I'm not really much of a technical player, despite the fact that a lot of my tutorials lately have been about technical builds, because that's what people seem to want tutorials for the most part. It's rare that I end up doing a lot of this myself, and there you can see I made the mistake of lighting some TNT to try and take care of those golems. It sort of backfired. I ended up having to kill them manually. One of them nearly killed me, but I managed to get them at range with a bow, and it was fine. I'm actually going to save these 3 farmers up here, and in a second I get a couple of boats, and I try and, like, basically bring them down safely from that little holding cell they were in before. They're perfectly fine, not traumatized by the experience whatsoever, and I decided I would keep them around because we're going to be able to do some stuff with automatic crop farms in future. I haven't really touched on that as a subject at all in this series, and I felt like they might be worth saving and keeping around for that reason. So they're in there with a few torches, perfectly safe in their boats until we need them later. So here we are back at the Iron Tower, and let's talk a little bit about how I improvised this build, because this build was basically made up from scratch in survival without any kind of tests in creative beforehand, and a lot of it relies on patterns and stuff that I've developed over my years playing Minecraft and kind of, focusing on building particularly. And I think it's kind of interesting to go over some of this stuff, because what I figured out at first for the perimeter of this, for the kind of the footprint of it, was a circle that was effectively going to be a series of flat walls. I wanted to make sure that there weren't going to be any spawnable spaces, so I wasn't at first planning on adding all that much depth to the build. The way you can add depth with a flat wall, though, is to use stairs and things like that, things that aren't necessarily a full flat block. And so, as you can see from the walls of this structure, I started to add depth using stairs every couple of blocks, just to kind of give it a little bit of a sense that the wall was put together with more than just straight stone bricks the whole way up. I've added a little bit more depth to the build just in this time-lapse by starting off the second floor by using those kind of stone brick formations at the tops of the walls there. I've added a log going straight up the middle of each of those stone brick sections just to pop out a little bit more. And now I'm working on balconies going around the perimeter of the structure in a kind of semicircle branching out from each side. And I think this really adds to the build later on. It's got an additional floor on top of this to come, so it ends up being quite a tall structure. But stuff like this about halfway up tends to break up the structure of the builds a little bit more, especially if it's a repetitive pattern like it is with the stone brick. We do something about that repetition a little bit later on in this time-lapse. Now, one thing I would definitely recommend when you're improvising a build like this, especially if you're working with a medieval build, is to limit the amount of materials you're using to start off with, at least. You can add some details later, but the main structure of the build is probably going to be made up of a fairly simple block palette. What we're working with here is dark oak logs and dark oak stairs. I'm not using any other kind of dark oak planks except for these little doorways on the tower that I'm adding here. We're mostly using stuff like stone brick, natural stone, maybe a couple of andesite stairs here and there just to mix up the stone brick pattern. I've got some spruce fences and some cobblestone walls, but the rest of it, it's just stone brick and dark oak wood. And the effect is quite striking. It can get a little bit monotonous, a little bit repetitive, and that's where you want to start adding a bit more textural variation, things like mixing natural stone in with stone brick, all the kind of stuff that we've covered before when I built walls and stuff like that. That's the stuff I'm starting to do around the base of the tower now, is just work on a little bit of naturalizing some of that, making some of these stone bricks stand out a little bit less, and that allows the eye to rest a little bit, stops the whole structure looking quite so busy, and ultimately gives it a feeling that's a little bit more natural, like it's been worn down over time. That's the kind of consideration that you can apply afterwards if you want to detail the structure a little bit more, but it's really just a case of applying it as you go if you want to kind of nail it first time. And then after that, it just becomes about using patterns, especially for a build this size. Now, I'm building the walls on this higher level here. You'll notice it's exactly the same wall pattern that I've already used for the base level. We're not even going to add the balcony on this section of it. We're just going to bring the walls up to the full height of the farm, or at least to the full height of those villager cells. We might add a little bit more to the top, but unfortunately I had to save that for another day just because of time constraints. But typically, if you're not working with all that much time, as long as you've got a pattern that you can repeat, you don't have to make every wall unique. And if nothing else, it just means you get the structure in place so that you can come back to it and detail it as much as you want later, but at least the thing is actually built first. It's like having a first draft of a novel written. You've got all of the framework and stuff there beforehand, and then after that you can focus on refining it and editing it until you get it into a position where it's actually worth reading. But just like writing a novel, or just like anything, really, the key is to practice, and there is really no shortcut to building well, unless you're just copying somebody else's tutorial build block for block or something like that. But the majority of it is just something that's learned through repetition and through trying new things, which might be easier for some folks in creative mode, but personally, if you're happy to improvise and if you're happy to make mistakes and just keep trying, I find survival just as easy a canvas to work with as creative. Hey folks, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the time-lapse. It's really weird not having the iron farm here now. Like, look at this picture from a distance. I'm so used to seeing the iron farm rising up above that hill over there. But no worries, because we have an equally large structure now rising up above the farmhouse. And it does look really weird in proportion. Really? The Wandering Trader again? I cut it out of the time-lapse, but there was a section where two Wandering Traders appeared at once. And this guy is the third. They have been everywhere today. I wonder if the other guys have actually even despawned yet, because there was one down here by the river. He didn't leave his llama anywhere. There was one guy who was up here on the hill. He seems to have gone as well. But that guy over there is still there. The trader is the bane of my life at this point. He just turns up absolutely everywhere. But like I was saying, before I was interrupted by llama noises, the new iron farm building does tend to make the farmhouse look a little bit tiny. And I had told myself that I wasn't really going to do a whole lot with this spawn area in future, that I wanted to keep the farmhouse there as kind of a sign of where we started and where we could potentially go from there, being all around us, you know. But I'm not entirely certain about that now. It's got this big looming castle structure in the background, which is still not done, by the way. And I'm really sorry that I couldn't get more of the build done for you today, but I have been working on this on and off all day. It was just taking a long time, and it's just really, really warm today. So I'm going to put a poll in this video, actually. Do you guys think that we should keep this farmhouse as a reminder of what we've come from, the humble roots that we started with, and potentially a landmark for people to recognize if we make this world available as a world download in future, which I do intend to do at some point, I promise? Or should we potentially redevelop it into something new and make this area around here into a bit more of an extension of Founders Forge and make the industrial district really feel like the industrial area of this town, have everything be kind of connected? Because right now it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense that there is a wheat field here in between this area that's got a bunch of buildings over there and a bunch of buildings over here. The farmland isn't typically in the middle of all of the city stuff, so I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this anymore, especially now we've built the iron tower in the background. And I'm really happy with the tower. I thought it started out looking a little bit plain, but with the details we were able to add in today's time-lapse, I'm really quite happy with how it's coming together. One of the things I really want to do is create a big archway kind of in between the two towers to connect them there. And that's something I wanted to do in today's time-lapses, but I really didn't have the time. You will notice, of course, that there are a few technical hitches with this farm, and it turns out that I was a little bit mistaken when I was explaining how I thought iron golems spawned around those villager cells. I was thinking it was more like a circular radius in the same way that it's a radius for the player when mobs spawn, but it really does seem to be an 8x8 square that they work with, because making these towers circular has meant that we get a ton of, I say a ton of, like, we get the occasional golem actually spawning on the balconies around the outside here, or occasionally even in the alcoves where I was putting together these kind of details with the cobblestone walls and the fences there. I was just finding golems that would spawn in there occasionally, even while I was working on the build, and we've already seen them spawning on the tops of the walls. So I've been a little bit more meticulous in slabbing some of these areas, and in fact it's something I plan on doing a little bit more around here once I've gathered a few more resources together. But having some slabs on the outer reaches of the balcony here probably makes a little bit of sense, considering that we might potentially, get stuff like this happening, where a golem is spawning halfway up a block in the middle of nowhere. I've now taken out the block, and that guy does seem to be pretty firmly wedged into the wall. So I'm going to try and scaffold up from here, just take out that slab so I can place some scaffolding, and we'll try and nudge him down into the room below. Or, alternatively, I guess he could just stand there and suffocate in that block. That's fine, I guess. We've got another guy out here on the back side of the tower as well. And believe me, these guys have not all spawned, like, at once. They are all spawning just kind of over the course of, half an hour or so. But, yeah, it does seem to be happening occasionally. Of course, the majority of the golems are still going into the farm, but eventually these folks could slow down the rates. And so I really have to be very meticulous about slabbing the outside of the tower, where we've got these occasional little details that I just wanted to put there because, they were blocks that I could maybe work with. But no, it looks like we do have to make sure that we slab those areas as well. Oh well, we will survive, we will live, and I really like the way some of the balcony stuff came together especially, so it's always kind of nice to get a different perspective on this farm. Now, one other thing that people did note from yesterday's episode, which I have to thank everybody for, is pointing out that that platform there did not really seem to be spawning any golems at all during the time-lapse. And that seems to have continued even after I've moved the killing area for the golems down a little bit, because I was worried that maybe they were still within the detection range of these villagers in the lower cells here. And what I actually think is happening to them is that they are seeing a golem as it falls down from either side of the farm here or here, and that's basically triggering them to say, we've seen a golem recently, we don't need to spawn one, we trust that there is one and it's going to deal with the zombie threat. So unfortunately, it looks like this lower platform here is kind of out of commission unless we can figure out that problem. And that's something I will probably experiment with a little bit more. Maybe we can block off their line of sight using some more slabs on the sides here so they're just looking like a dead at that zombie in the middle or something like that. I'm not certain quite how to resolve that. And if anybody has any solutions to that problem, I've noticed a lot of people identifying the problem, but if you know how it could potentially be fixed, then do let me know, because it would be very useful to have that information. But for now, of course, the farm is still running incredibly well. And in fact, I've set up a collection area for both the iron and for the poppies to be turned into bone meal down here. And what I'm going to do is have a kind of outlet pipe for it that goes into the river in theory, but it's not actually going to be a pipe with anything coming out of it over here. Instead, it's going to be a way for me to get in and get to this storage system, because as you can see, we are right below the farm here. We're hearing the noises of the golems dying, and we have another 27 stacks, almost 30 stacks now of iron ingots, plus we have this little filter system here, which is filtering the poppies down into a composter, and from there into this lowest chest, which contains the bone meal. And we can take that out, craft it into bone blocks, use those in our builds, or just keep the bone meal for use in other farms. If you wanted to, you could even have your iron farm hooked up to a bone meal dispenser in an automatic tree farm and chain your farms together so that you could AFK at an iron farm whilst also planting saplings that were being grown automatically from the bone meal that was provided by the iron farm. I don't think it would be all that sustainable, because I don't think the iron farm would provide bone meal quickly enough, but it would be fun. And to be honest, I think it's a really cool thing that we can now compost all of the poppies from the iron farm, because let's face it, nobody was short of red dye in this game, especially once you have a rose bush or something handy. So it's cool that we can now compost the poppies, turn them into bone meal, and have every aspect of the iron farm be immediately useful to us. Because I'm using bone meal all over the place. I'm using bone meal to grow trees whenever I need to grab more resources. Oh boy, looks like we have a heck of a patrol on our hands. I'm going to despawn those guys by flying away, because I don't need to deal with a raid right next to the Iron Tower, especially considering that the pillagers will potentially target villagers. And that's another thing that you can potentially use in an iron farm, though, because pillagers technically count as a threat to villagers, and so much like the zombie, they will go into panic mode and they will end up spawning iron golems to defend themselves in that instance as well. Of course, the problem with that is that pillagers have ranged attacks, and so you'll end up with the pillagers potentially attacking the villagers from range. But if you use a Vindicator, they have a different detection range for those. If you use a Ravager, they have a different detection range for those as well. So there are options for these iron farms. There are actually a whole variety of things that you can do with them. So I'm looking forward to seeing other people's designs in future, especially if they turn out to be Ravager powered. That would be pretty special. But for now, the Iron Tower is going strong. And thank you guys so much for the support on the Iron Farm episode and yesterday's episode as well. I really hope that you guys enjoy some of these more technical episodes. And today has been a bit more of a buildy one, but I hope you enjoyed that too. Don't forget to leave a like on the episode if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.